Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Notes from Underground is a seminal exploration of the existential struggles of man. Written in two parts, the novel starts with an embittered, retired civil servant known as the Underground Man who resists societal norms and rationalism in favor of personal freedom and individuality. The first section, a philosophical monologue, delves into his conflicted views on society, self-awareness, and the human condition. The second part illustrates his struggles through interactions with others, notably in his manipulative relationships and a disastrous evening with former schoolmates. This narrative serves as a critique of the Enlightenment values of 19th century Russia, revealing the deeper, often darker layers of human psychology and the irrational side of human nature. The Underground Man's introspection and paradoxical nature underline Dostoevsky's themes of alienation, moral nihilism, and the clash between modernity and the timeless torment of human existence. Let's deep dive into the book. Introduction to the Underground Man. Notes from Underground opens with a bitter monologue from its protagonist, known only as the Underground Man. A former government official, he has retreated from society to live in isolation in St. Petersburg. At 40 years old, he is spiteful, highly introspective, and scornful of modern ideologies. The narrative begins with him reflecting on his own miserable existence and the perverse pleasure he derives from his suffering and self-loathing, establishing a vivid portrait of a man at odds with the world and himself. Early life and intellectual development. The Underground Man recounts his earlier years, marked by a keen intellect and an acute awareness of his own detachment from society. He reflects on his education and the development of his philosophical views, which are deeply cynical and critical of the rationalism and utopianism that characterize the 19th century intellectual climate. His soliloquy delves into his dysfunctional interactions with society, highlighting his inability to forge meaningful connections due to his overwhelming sense of superiority and alienation. The philosophy of inaction. Delving deeper into his psychological makeup, the Underground Man discusses the concept of consciousness and free will, presenting himself as a specimen of excessive consciousness that leads to inertia. He argues that acute awareness renders him incapable of action, as it subjects every decision to overanalysis and leads to paralysis. This section showcases his life as a series of contradictions, where his intelligence and awareness prevent him from participating in the basic joys and engagements of everyday life. Critique of rational egoism. The protagonist criticizes the principles of rational egoism and utilitarianism, which were prevalent philosophical movements of his time. He believes that no man can act solely for his best interests, and that true human nature involves acting irrationally and destructively against one's own best interests. This rejection forms the crux of his argument, emphasizing the irrationality inherent in humanity and the impossibility of creating a society based entirely on logic and reason. Personal isolation. The Underground Man describes his profound isolation and loneliness, which he sometimes attempts to alleviate by visiting a brothel. These visits provide brief, superficial connections with others, yet they reinforce his isolation as they never result in genuine emotional engagement. His disdain for others, coupled with a masochistic desire for humiliation, perpetuates his cycle of self-imposed alienation and misery. A flashback to a party. Transitioning to a particular incident from his past, the Underground Man recalls attending a farewell dinner for a school acquaintance, Zverkov, whom he despises. This event is pivotal as it illustrates his antagonistic relationships and his perceived intellectual superiority. At the dinner, he behaves confrontationally, ultimately alienating himself from the group and solidifying his outsider status. His interactions are awkward and filled with envy and contempt for his more successful peers. A confrontation and its aftermath. Following the disastrous dinner, the underground man follows his former schoolmates to a brothel, intent on asserting some form of superiority or connection. His interactions are marked by hostility and confusion. He confronts Liza, a young prostitute, whose vulnerability initially moves him, and he begins to concoct a fantasy of rescuing her from her plight, which highlights his delusions and the disconnect between his intentions and actions. The relationship with Liza. In one of the novel's more complex interactions, the underground man invites Liza to his apartment under the guise of wanting to help her. Their conversation oscillates between his genuine desire to connect and his instinct to dominate and degrade. Ultimately, he reveals his own wretchedness to her, culminating in an emotional and humiliating confession that pushes her away, encapsulating his self-destructive tendencies and deep-seated loneliness. Liza's departure. After revealing his true nature and the depth of his misery, Liza initially shows compassion towards the underground man, which he cannot accept. Overwhelmed by his own vulnerability, he ultimately drives her away with cruelty and bitterness. Her departure marks the final rejection he experiences, reinforcing his isolation and self-loathing. The narrative leaves him ruminating on his lost opportunity for redemption and human connection. Conclusion of the underground experience. The book concludes with the underground man reflecting on his interactions with Liza and the broader implications for his life. He contemplates the cycle of misery he perpetuates, but remains entrenched in his ways. The narrative ends with him acknowledging the futility of his existence and the inevitability of his solitude, leaving the reader with a poignant insight into the self-destructive nature of excessive introspection and isolation. Let's explore together the main themes and concepts of the book. Alienation and isolation. Notes from Underground deeply explores the theme of alienation, with the protagonist living a life of isolation from society. His voluntary retreat into the underground symbolizes his estrangement from social norms and human connections. The underground man's sense of superiority, combined with his self-loathing and pessimism, prevents him from forming meaningful relationships. This isolation is both a shield and a prison, highlighting the destructive nature of total withdrawal from society and the complex relationship between individual identity and societal participation. Freedom and free will. Dostoevsky explores the concept of free will through the character of the underground man, who champions the idea of irrational action as the ultimate expression of freedom. He argues against the deterministic ideas of the Enlightenment, suggesting that true freedom includes the capacity to act against one's own interests or reason. This defiance of logical norms and predictable behavior underscores a broader philosophical debate about whether humans can ever be completely free if bound by societal expectations or rational self-interest. Self-awareness and self-destruction. The protagonist's heightened self-awareness leads to a paralyzing self-consciousness that inhibits action and fosters self-destructive behavior. His incessant introspection results in a deeper understanding of his own flaws, but also traps him in a cycle of misery and self-loathing. This theme reflects the existential view that excessive awareness can prevent genuine engagement with life, leading to despair and inactivity. The underground man's life illustrates how profound self-awareness can detach an individual from practical existence and lead to self-sabotage. Critique of rationalism and utopianism. The book serves as a critique of the rationalist and utopian ideologies prevalent in 19th century Russian intellectual circles. The underground man attacks the idea that human society can be improved through science and rational thought alone. He mocks the notion of a perfectible human society, driven by logic and reason, arguing that such ideals overlook the complexity and inherent irrationality of human nature. His philosophical rants against these movements underscore the limitations of rational thought and the unpredictable, often illogical nature of human behavior. The search for meaning and identity. Throughout the novel, the underground man struggles with his identity and the search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent world. His isolation and philosophical musings are in part an attempt to define himself against the societal norms he rejects. This theme is a precursor to existentialism, as it deals with the individual's struggle to find personal significance in the face of a confusing and contradictory world. The narrative explores whether it is possible to construct a coherent identity in a modern society that often seems superficial and inauthentic. Let's talk about the author. Fyodor Dostoevsky was a Russian novelist, short story writer, essayist, and journalist, renowned for his exploration of psychology in the troubled political, social, and spiritual atmospheres of 19th century Russia. Born in 1821 in Moscow, Dostoevsky's works often feature complex characters and profound philosophical themes. His major works include Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky's narratives frequently delve into issues of morality, free will, and the human struggle with sin and redemption. He is celebrated for his deep character analysis and has had a profound influence on literature, psychology, and philosophy. Dostoevsky passed away in 1881 in St. Petersburg. Sincere thanks for watching. If you found this summary helpful, consider taking a moment to hit the subscribe button, like or share the video. If you have any feedbacks or book requests, make sure to leave a comment. Regardless, I wish you a great day.